before we get to your questions, we've got a few samples to cover. So, Jim, what'd you bring for us tonight?
Okay, well, I think Fred was intending on showing this last week, and it's still very relevant at this time to show these beetles. On my left-hand side, we have Japanese beetles, and they're moving across the state and becoming more and more pestiferous as they go, and even in field crops now. Did you notice with the Japanese beetle how much different it will be with this other beetle that I'm going to mention? But Japanese beetles are beautiful beetles for what they do. Greenish, metallic in color, but you notice on the side of the body there's some white tufts of hair. In fact, on the underside of their body, they're just completely silvery white. So that's a Japanese beetle, maybe about 3/8 of an inch, half of an inch long, and you're going to find it feeding on leaves and in roses like you see there, and very voracious. Now the second beetle that I wanted to show is called a sand chafer, and it's a relative. It's on my left-hand side, the right-hand side of the screen. Yeah, the sand chafer looks similar, doesn't it? I mean, they're the same body shape and everything like that. But the sand chafer does not have the beautiful greenish coppery markings as a Japanese beetle does. And it's just basic brown and a shiny black. But you notice it doesn't even have those white tufts of hair along the sides of the body. So both of them are kind of nuisance beetles. Japanese beetle far worse, I think, than the sand chafer. But they're active from about late June all the way through July, maybe to the very first part of August. And so just important to identify what they are, how to tell them apart. And of course, we are interested in knowing just exactly where all the Japanese beetles are going to show up across the state because they keep moving. So all you BYF viewers, when you get out there in the garden, you have yellow flowers, roses, or linden trees, for example, look for Japanese beetles and let us know. Contact your local extension office. It's just a matter of just getting information and not so much trying to control them. That's an individual issue now.
Thanks, Jim. What have you got for us there, Zach?
Rock, I brought in tonight bird's foot trefoil, and right now it's got the vibrant yellow flowers, and this one's a little bit, it's been harvested for about 20 minutes, starting to lose its turgor already. But vibrant yellow flowers, you'll see this along roadsides, unirrigated areas, and I think it's one of the prettiest weeds going right now. This is a legume, and I'm getting a number of questions right now about introducing legumes into lawns, and either clover or bird's foot trefoil, and it's a pretty good idea for eco lawns where you want very low maintenance because these are legumes and they fix nitrogen, so they provide nitrogen to the turf that's there. The problem with introducing a broadleaf plant into a lawn is that you'll lose the ability to control dandelions or maybe things like thistles and things like that with selective herbicides in the fall. So I always want to be careful with mixing broadleaves with grasses.
But for some people, it might be a good idea.
For some people, it's great. Yeah, for people with the eco lawn, again, it's the problem if it just sticks with bird's foot trefoil or clover in that lawn, that's great. But then, since you lose the ability to control other broadleaves, you might get thistles in there and some other weeds that are just to get a lot more difficult. But you know, if you want an eco lawn, have at it.
Go for it. Thanks, Zach. Amy, what have you got in front of you?
Well, I brought a poor little sad little summer squash tonight, a little yellow summer squash, but showing what we typically see this time of year. This is blossom end rot. You're going to be seeing it on any of your cucurbits, but we also see it on tomatoes also. So you see how the fruit is developing and then it turns brown at the end and then it kind of moves its way up. This, if you take a closer look, is starting to get a little fuzzy at the end. The fuzziness is actually other pathogens moving in to break down the dead material. Blossom end rot has been linked with calcium deficiencies, water not being frequently in the garden. So there isn't really a lot you can do. A lot of times I just pull them off and throw them away. If you leave them on the vine or on the plant a little bit longer, those secondary pathogens that are fuzzy right now are going to break it down. It's going to get soft and squishy and then make it favorable for other diseases to come in. But some varieties are a lot more notorious, especially on tomatoes. So if you're seeing a lot of problems with blossom end rot on your tomatoes this year, keep in mind what the variety is and avoid that variety. Next year is the best way to work with that one.
All right, thank you, Amy. Dennis.
Yes, we have here some herbivory by some fox squirrels on a pine tree. And you can see the progression where they started to eat the green cones, getting moisture mainly this time of year, and they dropped a couple, but most of them they pretty much ate all the way. And even though there's sap and pitch in there, they do get moisture and nutrients. So you may see a lot of this on the ground under your conifers, and it's just fox squirrels. It's not a disease, it's not something. And yeah, they're eating a lot of them, but most of them would fall anyways and not seed, so I just say let the squirrels have them unless it's causing a lot of problems. So you may see this, and we're seeing a lot of it around campus.
Thanks, Dennis. We're going to go to some pictures, and Jim, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
This one is basically they found this in their vegetable garden, and we're hoping you could ID it for them.
Well, this is an interesting one. It's in the stink bug family, but it's not a typical plant-feeding stink bug. This is a nymph of what's called the spine soldier bug, and that's what the adult looks like right there. And you can see on the sides where the so-called shoulders would be, there's two sharp spines. And so it is a beneficial insect. It feeds on a lot of caterpillars in the garden and the landscape setting. And so when you see that, it might look like a brown stink bug, but look for those spines on the sides and let that baby go to work.
All right, thank you, Jim. Here's one for you, Zach. It's an irrigation question. They've mentioned how they watered. And there's a series of pictures here, I believe. They've watered for 35 minutes per station every other day, then went to 35 minutes per day, now changed to 1 hour every other day. Always water early morning through midday, and they want to know what's going on in this yard.
Yeah, I'm guessing it looks like a drought pattern or a bad sprinkler pattern. The very first picture there is almost looked like a crop circle where there either had bad overlap. And there's right in the center of that picture, about halfway back, you can see almost looks like a crop circle. That's a good sign that there's not enough pressure in the sprinklers or not enough volume in the sprinklers. And all of us want to measure our sprinklers in terms of minutes. And we can't tell how much water you're applying in X number of minutes. You really have to figure out with either tuna cans or something like that how much water you're applying, and you'd be shocked at the distribution of that water. So good chance it's drought. I would take a look at your irrigation system, try to figure out how much water it's applying per minute or per 5 minutes or per 15 minutes and adapt it accordingly. I would guess that all of that is just drought dormancy. It's not dead.
All right, thanks, Zach. We've got a picture here of this powder, some sort of disease, and they want to know kind of what's going on with that, Amy.
Okay, this is this common powdery mildew. This is the time of year we're going to see it. We're starting to get in those high humidity type situations. It's one of the few fungus that actually does not like water on its leaves. So one way you can do is you can spray it down with water. It will slow it down. But the trick with powdery mildew is this is going to continue to come back. You can try to increase air circulation, but it looks like it's like on a deck or a patio, which makes it a little more difficult to increase air circulation. So you can use fungicides. Typically, I don't recommend it. You could always try the old home remedy of a tablespoon of baking soda to a gallon of water, and you can spray that. That changes the pH on the leaf surface, and that will slow down the growth of the powdery mildew. But you would have to do that once a week. But most of the time, it's not going to kill the plants. You're just going to have some white powdery growth on them, and they'll continue to bloom throughout the summer.
Thanks, Amy. Dennis, these people in Valentine have issues with their tomatoes, and one day they have a lot of them, and the next day they don't, and they sent us a picture to have you take a look at and see what you might think might be going on there.
Well, it sounds like a fairly good sized herbivore. It could be deer by the height that the plants have been cut off, because deer are browsers. So it could be whitetail or mule deer in that area. But I would definitely look at deer problems, and there are some repellents out there for deer. And if you're not in a town, you can use some electrified fence it doesn't hurt the deer, it just keeps them away from that area. But look for prints, hoof prints, to see if it's deer. But out in Valentine, they don't really have woodchucks, and most of the other mammals they have are carnivores. So I would go with deer.
They did mention, sorry, I should have mentioned, they did say they have a really high fence around it, and I know deer can bound over a fairly high fence. They were wondering if squirrels could be a possibility.
Not the way it's been cut off so high.
Okay.
The squirrels would take bites out of, a squirrel has a hard time taken away with the whole tomato. It's too heavy, and so they take bites and leave the bites there, usually with squirrels.
What if it was a Rambo of a squirrel?
Yeah, it could be. And in Valentine, there's not a real lot of tree squirrel except for where we planted trees.
And I'm going to put on my cheaters here. Hang on. This person's first attempt at growing pumpkins, which are always fun, and they've got something working their pumpkins a little bit, and they want to know, at least they believe there's work in the pumpkins, they want to know what this is and what they should do about it.
Okay, in the picture, that looks to me like it could be spotted or striped cucumber beetles. They are attracted to the blossoms of squashes, and they love to feed on them, and very rarely on the tissue, the leaf tissue itself. They are instrumental in spreading bacterial wilt of cucurbits. Pumpkin, for the most part, I believe, Amy, is pretty resistant.
They're fairly resistant, but there are a
Pretty
few
resistant.
varieties that will be attacked by it.
Yeah. As far as pollination, affecting pollination, there's a possibility they could have a negative effect on that. If it were me, I hate cucumber beetles, but it's because of the cucumbers. If they're there and you're growing cucumbers, you got yourself a population of beetles already there. They're going to move over to the cucumbers. So I don't know. I'd leave them be because pollination is so essential. By the bees and everything like that. Perhaps if you want to spray them with pyrethrins, you know, this quick knockdown, kill them, and then it dissipates very quickly, kind of a spray. In the evening at sunset, you could do that, and that would certainly keep the numbers down and help prevent maybe moving into the cucumber patch.
Why, thanks, Jim. Zach, they know what this is, this weed that's going to come up here, but they want to know how to control it once it already has the burrs on it. And how can you remove the sandburrs in future years?
Actually, this is puncture vine, I believe. Am I looking at it right?
Yeah,
I think,
no.
if I'm looking at the right picture.
But they, in western Nebraska, puncture vine and sandbur are almost synonymous.
Oh, okay.
Or Texas
And it's
sandbur.
grassy
Or Texas. Okay.
or grassy
Okay.
sandbur is how
All
they
right.
separate it out.
Okay, so I'll pick this. Well, I'm going to call it puncture vine because I'm from the eastern Nebraska now, and so puncture vine's it is difficult if you control it. Early when it's small, you can control it by a wide variety of typical broadleaf, three-way type broadleaf herbicides. If you wait a little bit longer, starts getting out of hand, the research would suggest that anything speed zone, which is a typical three-way plus carfentrazone, is a little bit better. But once it gets, probably dinner plate size or beyond, it's really difficult to control. Pre-emergence could work. My choice would be anything that contains isoxaben, which would be Gallery or Snapshot or something like that. And this only a problem in very thinly turfed or roadsides or things like that.
All right, thanks, Zach. This one's for you, Amy. They've attached some photos of an oak tree. They've got hopes that you can help them out.
The looks of this oak tree, I guess I would first start off, you notice how yellow the leaves are. So this is probably a tree that might be dealing with a little bit of iron chlorosis. The veins are still a little bit green in the middle, but as a whole, the tree is very yellow. And so that's an indication that the tree is very stressed. And where it's turning brown, it's turning brown in between the veins, which to me is also an indication of water. It's not getting enough water, so we're probably dealing with like a root girdling issue, planted too deep, maybe not providing enough water to that oak tree as a whole. So I would try to add a little bit more water, see if you can get those leaves to green up a little bit, see if it is really iron chlorosis. And the quick, easy way to do that is you just go to the local nursery or garden store and you buy a liquid form of iron and spray it on the tree. And those leaves, if it's an iron deficiency from iron chlorosis, they'll green right back up. And they'll stay green for maybe 3-4 weeks and then they'll turn back yellow. But it's a quick, easy way to know, is it really iron chlorosis that's affecting it, or is it the tree is that stressed because of a root issue and not getting enough water as a whole? And then check to see how deep that tree is planted. We don't want trees planted too deep. You should be able to see that nice root flare right at the ground level. And if it's below that, then we're a little too deep. And sometimes that can suffocate the tree as a whole. And then we're going to slowly see decline of that tree.
Thanks, Amy. Nice job of giving kind of a diagnostic tool to rule out A and maybe it's B. Nicely done. Dennis, here we've got a picture of an ash tree. And they've got a wound in the ash tree coming up, and they've had it treated by an arborist for borers. Want to know if maybe you can come up with another possible malady.
I'm not sure the beginning of this problem, but I can see
Whoa,
it looks
look at
like
that.
possibly a fox squirrel. Fox squirrels in Nebraska have usually 2 litters, one in February and one in the beginning of July. So about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, females would have been trying to find a place to have young. And it seems like part of that tree must be hollow inside. And so therefore the squirrel wants to get into that hollow protective location where it's cooler and to have her young. And so by the incisor marks, especially the bottom teeth too, I would say it's a fox squirrel trying to get in.
This is a really, and I'm going to put on my thinking glasses. Let's give that a shot. That's much better. I've seen honeybees taking over our bird bath. From dawn to dark, we have a dozen or more bees lining the rim, and ever so often one swims across. I don't know if they do the backstroke or not. How much water does a bee need, and how far will they fly to drink? Is there a hive nearby?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I'm not going to be able to provide a real thorough answer because I'm not an apiarist, but I picked up a little bit of information. Anyway, the bees themselves, when it gets really hot outside and dry, the bees start looking for sources of water. And you'll notice that bird feeder is ideal because it's real shallow, and they'll line up along the edges, and they'll do this with creeks and ponds and pools and things like that as well. They're imbibing water into their stomach, and you can imagine they only have probably a drop or two's worth of volume of water that they take back to their colony or to the hive. And then what they do at that point is they move to the hive entrance and they release this water, and they're fanning their wings, and essentially what they're doing is trying to cool that hive down, because if it reaches a certain critical temperature, all that wax and honey and everything and the brood comb is going to melt. So they have to try to regulate the temperature of that hive. So that's why they do it. And of course they need it for themselves as well, to share among themselves, because in any condition when it's really dry and hot, everybody or every critter needs water. So it's really a fascinating process that this viewer really got a real good handle on it by observing it.
Yeah, I thought the question was really interesting as
Yeah.
well. Zach gets to play cleanup for me on a question I had last week where I was fairly flippant in my approach to a cutting-edge grass seed, as seen on TV, which you know it's good, okay? And anyway, so they want to know a little bit more about that and perhaps why I was as critical as I was. And Zach, I believe you did some homework and came up with some information for me.
Yes, I did, and like always, I'm cleaning up what Rock does. So it's a cutting-edge grass seed, and a little background here, we do a lot of testing of cultivars at the universities across the country, and both cultivars and grass species, and so anything that we see that looks larger than life or the next best thing, we're always a little bit critical. So I don't blame Dr. Gassois at all about being flippant or a little critical, but comes out it's equal parts Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass, tall fescue, chewings fescue, and hard fescue. And so of those, 2 of them at best would be okay for Nebraska lawns. And so the other 5, even though equal parts, they're not going to survive in any lawns. And then if we get into tall fescue, that probably wouldn't survive the winter out west. So it's pretty iffy. And did some math. It costs 2 pounds, $19.95, which works out to be about $10 per thousand. You could seed Kentucky bluegrass or tall fescue for probably 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet. So somebody's making a little bit of money out of this, and my sense after, I don't know, a year or 2 years, you'll be reseeding again if you use this grass seed.
All right.
So pretty, Rock was right as much as I hate to say that, Rock was right last week. Sorry.
I'm not sure quite how to take that. Amy, this is one for you, and they grew tomatoes indoors, planted them up and got them ready to go and everything, and then they acclimated them like we're supposed to, and then stuck them outside. And the minute they stuck them outside, all the leaves curled up. They said it happened to almost all of them they planted. The neighbors complained about the same thing, but they're bearing fruit, but the leaves look horrible. Any
Leaves
idea?
If it's being everything and the neighbors complain, it's a herbicide drift issue, most likely. 2,4-D growth regulator is notorious on tomatoes. That is a herbicide, and I know people that are still spraying 2,4-D or growth regulator herbicides right now. We do not spray growth regulator herbicides once it's above 75 degrees, ever. It will drift, and it will move from where the home lawn where you're trying to kill those dandelions or whatever broadleaf, and move over to your tomatoes and your other plants. Grapes are very sensitive to it, and peppers and several other landscape ornamental plants, and it'll curl those leaves, and they'll curl up and they'll get like a shoestring appearance. They'll get really long, elongated, and yellow in coloration. The new growth that comes out should be looking healthy and fine. The fruit that it sits on will be perfectly fine too. It just slows it down a little bit, but the plants will come out of it. So next year, just be aware if you're spraying any 2,4-D or growth regulators to do it before it gets too warm And if you're spraying those right now, please put them away for the year before you damage any other plants that are in your neighborhood.
Some of the things, so depending on who's spraying them, obviously you have to be careful. You have to read the label, be careful
Right.
with the label. Most of those herbicides should be applied in the fall to begin with, but with the professionals doing doing the application, those guys have different formulations, different products that might be a little bit less volatile. And so a blanket statement at 75, yeah, probably for homeowners. You could switch to a granular product if you're a homeowner, but some of the products that the professionals now have available to them have a lot less movement.
Thank you for the clarification there, Zach.
Thanks, Zach and Amy. Dennis?
Yes.
Near Pender, near the house patio, tomatoes and peppers, something digs up newly planted plants. What's doing it and how can it be prevented?
Well, without seeing any signs or pictures, it's hard to say, but 13-line ground squirrels are notorious for digging up newly planted things. Rabbits, if it's very green and luscious, like cotyledons, they will pull them right up and eat them. If it's just the seeds just beginning to break ground, it's probably a 13-line ground squirrel. And we have a neb guide on both those animals for control. You can trap them in box traps. With a 13-line ground squirrel, you can use toxicants. With the rabbit, you cannot use toxicants.
So what if you use the toxicants for the 13-line ground squirrel and a rabbit touches it?
Well, the toxicant is a bait toxicant, and the rabbit probably will not take it.
Got it. We're going to look at some digital imagery,
Okay.
since all of you seem to want to put Y at the end of your answers. So we're going to start with you, Jim. They had sent a picture of their 10-year-old pine tree, and apparently no one responded. So they gave us another chance, which I appreciate from the viewer. They've had bagworms in the past and have manually picked them off as well as sprayed the tree. Is this bagworm again? They can't see any bugs or worms, no cocoon visible, but just bare branches.
I think that's early indications of bagworm feeding. Just after they hatch out, they're all collected together, and as they feed, they're so small, they can't devour a single needle, so they chew little holes in each needle, and then the needles desiccate. And so you have this appearance like something is happening with desiccation or some other issue, when actually it's bagworms. And so right now, the bagworms are probably maybe a quarter of an inch long and still very susceptible to sprays. So I'd go ahead and check your, especially your spruces out, your junipers, your cedars. Squeeze the bags. If there's any bags attached, squeeze them. They're probably all empty by now, but the little ones will only be maybe about a quarter of an inch, and so you can go ahead and pull them off if that's all it takes. But otherwise, treat with Bacillus thuringiensis or an insecticide such as bifenthrin, and that'll hopefully keep the numbers down. But again, I think bagworms got hit pretty bad over this, and that's amazing. That has to be a phenomenal drought when bagworms get hit bad during a droughty year.
So that's one of the few good things that happened with the,
Yeah,
with the
I mean,
drought.
count your blessings.
I will chime in. If they're not seeing bagworms, it could very easily be a disease. There's a couple tip blights that will attack blue spruce, and they will make those tips lose their entire needle. So you want to take a really close look at that. If there isn't any bagworms, I would lean toward that fungal disease, and then you can spray with like a copper or a couple other fungicide type things, products to control them. But if you really want to make sure, you probably should cut a sample and take it in to make sure there isn't any of those fungal fruiting structures that would indicate the tip blight.
Amy, it wasn't really your turn.
I know, I like to jump in.
That's great.
Okay, Zach. Major frustrations with wild violets. They've been to Lowe's, they've been to Earl May, they've been to a number of different stores and heard a lot of different potential products. They've tried various things, and not to say that those products didn't work or whatever, but they're just wondering if their timing's off or what might be going on, and what exactly would be your recommendation.
If you choose to control wild violet, and it's really a choice, because some people like them, and this is a good picture. This is why we have a hard time controlling wild violets, because that's the rootstock. Yeah, and so any herbicides that we apply have to make it down to the rootstock to get long-term control. So this is a classic perennial that we treat in the fall, sometime September 15th till October 15th, and that's really the best time to control it. Anything that contains triclopyr is my favorite product for tough weeds like this, but a lot of the broadleaf weed herbicides will work when applied properly in the fall. Maybe 2 applications in the fall will really take care of it. Normally, violets show up in the shade, and so the turf's not very competitive, so you might also have to worry about the shade. So,
Thanks, Zach. Amy, these people, they've sent several pictures here, but they believe they've been told they have mosaic virus in their garden. They've tried things like soil sterilization, but to no avail, and they're seeing no matter what they plant, something seems to affect it, and they believe they've been told that it's a virus. And if you could take a look at these pictures and maybe get back to them with an answer, that would be great.
By the looks of the pictures that they sent us, these are the nice healthy leaves, because if I remember right, they have healthy leaves and then those leaves that were showing the same patterns on the same plant. I will believe that they're not been told the correct thing. It does not look like a mosaic pattern. Where they're getting those white spots on the leaf, to me that looks like a little bit of sunburn or sun scald a little bit. That's where the water's pooling a little bit. If you have any hard water, sometimes we'll see some calcification on those leaves. Nothing to worry about. Otherwise, it's also dealing with a little bit of environmental things. So the soil sterilization definitely didn't hurt your garden at all, but your cucurbits are going to be doing just fine. It's not a disease to worry about. It's all environmental type conditions where it's going. And I'm very thankful that you didn't skip me since I jumped in earlier, Rock.
No, I thought we bought it, but I include you anyway.
Oh, thank you.
Dennis.
Yes.
This is a picture of holes in pines in a pattern, and wonder if you can tell us what might be causing this.
Probably it's a type of bird, probably a sapsucker going after insects, but it could also be a flicker going after insects or some sap. So it's definitely a bird, type of woodpecker, flicker, or sapsucker.
Do they have a habit of doing it? Do they come back to the same?
Yeah, they come
Trunk
back
all
time
the
after
time?
time. If they get something, they will go back to the familiar territory.
We're going to do some more picture questions, and we're going to
Okay.
start with you, Jim. This is a moth identification, and if you could help the viewer out, that would be great.
All right, well that's, oh, there we go, yes. I saw this previously, so I can tell you all that is a Cecropia moth, and it looks like a female, and it looks like she's loaded full of eggs. If this image was recent, this one would be a straggler, because most of the moths do emerge in May through about mid-June. But I happen to have here a little bonus with that question, and that's the Cecropia caterpillar. So this is actually the stage that most Cecropias are at right now, maybe about 1/3 grown. It blends in well with the foliage. It has these little prickly yellow and red, I don't know what you call them. They look like ship mines, you know, from World War I or something. I can't quite describe them, but they're prickly. So if anything tries to bite it, they're going to have their tongue, you know, prickled by these little objects that are on the top of it. So feeds on crabapple, sometimes a pest in apple orchards, but you can simply pull them away and move them on to something else. Cecropia moth, Cecropia caterpillar.
Well, thank you, Jim. That's nice to have the backup there. How'd you know that?
I saw the image earlier, so I just ran to the lab and I got one because I knew we had one.
That's kind of annoying, actually. But, but Zach, if you could take a look at the pictures that come up, this is a weed people are having an issue with, and actually one that one of your graduate students, Chris Proctor, is working on as part of his dissertation.
Yes, that's actually, that one is my picture. They sent in different pictures, and that is Purslane. It's a summer annual, and if you think your life is bad, I have a graduate student that has just spent the last 4 years of his life studying this. It's a really unusual plant. Best way to control it, if you choose to control it, number one, thick turf, and it comes in next to sidewalks, and so a pre-emergent in the spring. Again, isoxaben, anything contains isoxaben is the best one. If you do choose to control it with a post-emergent product, the best one that we have found in 3 or 4 years worth of studies is something that contains triclopyr or maybe carfentrazone. Tough weed. Just hoeing it out doesn't work because it'll start to root from plant parts. And so if you choose to cut it out with a hoe, make sure you remove all of the plant parts.
Amy, these are potatoes.
Okay.
And they're wondering could it be verticillium wilt, and will verticillium wilt even affect potatoes?
We do have verticillium that can affect potatoes, but it's very, very rare. To me, it almost looks like these potatoes may be maturing a little bit early, or we will also see this type of symptoms if they've been too wet. Last year, we saw the potatoes mature really early because of the heat, and since we're starting to hit that heat again, we might start seeing a decline of potatoes also. But I would first stop and check to see the moisture level. If you're still thinking it's verticillium wilt, which I highly doubt, you need to cut the stem open. Verticillium wilt will affect the vascular system, and so the vascular system of the potato vine will be brown and discolored. So that'd be a quick, easy way. Take one of those vines, take a knife and split it open and take a look.
Thanks, Amy. Dennis, I think here's a series of pictures that are a snake or snakes.
Oh, great.
And I think they're looking for ID and whether they need to be
Well, it's a
concerned.
fox snake. What county are we in? Or we do have that information, but it's in eastern quarter of the state, almost the northeastern third of the state. Very common. They do climb trees, eat birds, baby birds and rodents. Called a fox snake. It has nothing to do with fox, but all snakes have a musk gland for defense, and people believe that the smell of the snake is analogous to the smell, the musk of a fox. So every snake has its own odor, and if you're a good herpetologist, you'll know those odors.
This is an Instack one. Help, I'm at war with squash bugs and they are winning. I've lost 3 acorn squash plants. They were big, beautiful plants. And it goes on and on about how they've tried 7 and they've tried squishing the eggs between their fingers and they rogue out 6 plants and they still have issues with squash bugs. And they're an avid BYF fan, so you got to give them the correct answer.
I can't give them
As
any,
opposed to the regular answer.
I can't give you any hope because, you know what, if they're established in an area, and especially if you keep planting squashes year after year, their populations are pretty high. Sounds like everything that should be done is being done, aside from maybe switching to perhaps another insecticide. I know there are a number of ready-to-use versions that you could try, but they're hard, very difficult to get rid of. I'd still keep up the practices of removing those eggs as they are seen and treating the base, you know, where the bugs hide during the day. When they're young, spray those young nymphs because they're more susceptible, but it's a real battle, so
Well, we've got another
hang
battle.
in there.
We've got another battle. This one's for Zach. Chameleon plant or bishop's weed is sometimes as it's called. They say it's just they've tried Roundup, they've tried all kinds of things. Once again, wondering if it's a timing issue, maybe what they might be trying a little bit differently.
Yeah, the bishop's weed, it's an escaped plant. It was it's not technically invasive, but it is an ornamental, and it's a typical broadleaf plant. It's a perennial, and so spraying that in the fall, September 15th through October 15th, that'll be most effective. If it's in the yard, that's not a problem. If it's in a garden, just be careful how you're spraying that and where that herbicide's going to land.
Okay, Dennis, we're going to go to you. Sorry, Amy. It's because you messed up earlier.
You're in the penalty box.
I am. I'm gonna cry.
This one I think you will not enjoy because they want to get rid of their cardinals. They live in Gage County and have cardinal hitting my south-facing window since April. We've put up physical barriers, and yet the bird still runs into the south-facing window. Anything they might do to keep that bird from bashing themselves against
Well,
the window?
cardinal is protected under the 1974 Migratory Bird Act, so you can't eradicate a cardinal. What kind of barriers are they putting up? You can try effigies of other birds or whitewashing the window so they cannot see their reflection, or hanging bird netting for a short period of time, like monophilic netting, draping it from the eaves of the home down over the window. And I would try something like that, because barriers or exclusion really are your only option because it is a protected species.
Real quick, Amy, what diseases in turf should people be looking for right now?
We should be looking for brown patch right now, and summer patch with it being hot and dry is going to be showing up, and just make an indication where those summer patch spots are and reseed this fall.
And reseed this fall. Do you think the diseases are going to be that severe this year that they're going to have to be doing some reseeding?
If you have summer patch, you might want to try to renovate your lawn. So
And where would they
reseeding.
get information on grasses for reseeding?
The NTAP, National Turf Grass Evaluation Program, or on our webpage, we have a number of publications on summer patch with,
Okay, great.
with cultivar recommendations of tolerant Kentucky bluegrass.
turf.unl.edu.
turf.unl.edu or Google for UNL turf.